Hi, I'm Jennifer Poole.
And I'm Dave Poole.
And this is our 20 days.
That again. Well, welcome to our 20 days. And today my guest is Paul Moorman. Paul and I worked together for quite a long time at the Mead Corporation and Mead Westvaco paper companies in the mid to late 90s through the mid 2000s, somewhere in that time frame. And Paul and I both had the good fortune to work for a man named John Langenbahn, who's still with us, and I hope to have joined either in this episode or on a future episode. John was Vice President of Information Resources. Interesting human being in that his undergraduate degree was in finance. He got a law degree and he ran technology. So kind of an interesting path to get from point A to point B. But I think his background and education and just him and the way he was raised, made for a fantastic leader. And I know I can attribute a good number of successes in my career to influences John had. So Paul, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on John and working for him and things that happened along your course of your career.
Well, as you mentioned, John, he wasn't an IT guy, and I think to some degree that really helped us because he was never going to get involved in trying to figure out what router to buy or what piece of software to buy, except one which I'll talk about later. So he allowed the group to run the IT organization. It was about 100, 110 people, give or take. And while he dealt with the political, the executives, the real tough stuff, because as we were going through quite a period of consolidation, starting in the early 80s, which is when I joined Mead, when we decided it would be neat to have one corporate network instead of the several that each of the divisions ran. So we worked on consolidating a lot of infrastructure, network, mainframes. We shut down data centers. So John handled all the political stuff that allowed that to happen. Right. And that's no mean feat in an organization. You have to kind of understand the paper business because paper businesses are, they're run by the mills, and rightfully so to a large degree because they're tasked with making paper and making money, and what they need is what they need. So it was no small feat to have somebody in the corporate office. I'm from corporate here. We're here to help you. Actually pave the way to do that in a company such as that. But he was really, really good at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good example because I know, we were about a $4 billion company, as I recall, in the middle of all of that. And we had, I'm going to get the exact number wrong, but 6 or 7 operating divisions. And they all made different products. But like you said, they were all almost all of them were mill centric, very operations focused. I remember a statistic out there that said that paper machine downtime cost something like $10,000 a minute. And in 1985 or $1990, that was a lot of money. And people didn't mind screaming and shouting when things like that happened. So the idea of a network being managed from afar and not in the direct control of the guy with his finger on the button of the paper machine was no small political feat. And John had a manner about him that he got that stuff done. And like you said, I always felt very happy that I didn't have to fight those battles. Once in a great while, you or I would be called in as a witness in the discussion. But it wasn't you or I making those decisions or pushing those political points. It was laying out the technical and organizational rationale for doing something a particular way. And, I always envied John's ability to kind of run that interference and let us do our jobs. I think that's a unique quality.
So I do remember the story when I first really met John. I mean, I'd been working there since early 81, and I got tapped somehow to run a data center move project. There was a data center in Cincinnati that we wanted to combine with the one in Dayton. And mysteriously, somebody volunteered me for that. I didn't. Well, I didn't. I said I don't. I did ask for it, sort of, because after we heard about it, I told somebody, "Oh, that's kind of a neat project. I would like to be involved in that, or even lead it." And next thing I know, a week later, I'm doing it. So
You're
there's
in
the whole
charge.
project. And I'm a 25, 26-year-old kid. I mean, and I think my greatest talent at the time was I was the backup to everybody else in our technical services group, so I had the time. So I kind of wonder whether it was anything to do with me or just the fact that I was, the person
You're
available.
available on the bench.
Yeah. So, but we did the conversion. Everything got successfully moved up. And a few weeks after all that, the DP director came and grabbed me and goes, "Hey, John wants to see you and another guy named Jerry Hatton, who led the project with me, and we're going up from our little office on 21st floor up to John's office and 25 in the exec, which I rarely ever got up to that, but really didn't know him. And Jerry and I, we were scared to death. We were meeting the boss.
Yeah.
We weren't really sure why." So, but I remember going into his office, and both of us were probably sweating. Probably could tell how nervous we were. But John thanked us for the conversion, gave us a nice little spot bonus for it. And Jerry and I walked back to our office, and I tell you, I think we were more relieved that we weren't in trouble than
Right.
that we actually got any money out of the whole thing. But yeah, it was kind of funny. But the real lesson there, and it was really something important, was those guys, those executives are kind of just like the rest of us. They're not, and John never came across as anything as being fearful or whatever. So my first real introduction to executive management was while being a scary one, was a very good one. And
Yeah.
later on in life, when my daughter worked at Midwest Vaco, she had to remind me that people were scared of me. Uh, and I'm like, how can Dad? You have to think. You've always told me that story about John. Think about it. Just stop and talk to people and get them to calm down. She just goes,
Yeah.
"I don't know what you people were so worried about. It's just my dad."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It is interesting that you do have to kind of keep in mind as you grow in an organization that when you're 2 or 3 levels above somebody in the organization, that in and of itself is intimidating, irrespective of who you are or how you act. Yeah, you could make that probably worse or you could make it better. But you're still, a couple of notches up the ladder from somebody else. So I always remember, speaking of, career growth, I remember having a conversation with John in his office on 25. And I remember that office just like it was yesterday. I can tell you his individual books he had on his bookshelf probably. Uh, but he said something about every 10 years, you probably need to reinvent yourself. And that always stuck with me. And I never made an effort to do it. But now here that I am 60 years old, retired, uh, and now entering a different chapter of my life, I look back and you know what? Through no effort of my own, about every 10 years, I kind of reoriented myself. I started out working in R&D, and then I went to corporate technology, and then I got into kind of an entrepreneurial sort of world. And now I'm kind of in that post-retired but not dead yet, sort of part of my life. And John's, whether it was advice or direction, certainly ended up being prophetic in terms of what happened with me. So I always liked John's approach. He never came across as preachy or demanding, but at least in my case, I knew when he really wanted something to get done in a particular way. And I don't know if any conversation you might have had with him kind of struck you in that manner.
oh, that's a good one. I think during our ERP project, because I had to be the go-between, because I reported to Jim McGrain, who was in charge of the project, but I was also dotted line still with John. So I was running the interference between the two of those. And that was probably the times when you had to sense out where the compromises were and how you could move forward in a joint way.
Yeah.
Reporting to two people at the same time can be a challenge.
So for everybody else watching that may not know the history and lineage of Mead's executive leadership, Paul mentioned Jim McGrain. Jim had been the CFO of one of our most profitable operating units, our coated board division, and became the head of our ERP project, which became an SAP implementation project. And then ultimately, once Mead and Westvaco merged and John retired, Jim became the new CIO or VP of Information Technology or whatever the title was. So that kind of gives you a little context. So Paul was in the unique position of, stuck in the middle with you, as it were. It's one of those, you got, and two very different people stylistically. Jim was a guy who kind of reveled in conflict. He would make conflict because there wasn't enough conflict. And John was about, I'd rather just get something done. Can we get on with it? Type of thing. So I have a lot of empathy for the position you described. So anyway, I'm sorry for the long explanation. I thought some folks that don't know the Mead lineage might benefit from that background.
Yeah. So John, you kind of earlier asked, events or whatever that John, how he really, helped my career out. And certainly the first one was, besides the data center project, which I'm assuming he knew something about before I did. When we reorganized the information resources group into the client server paradigm. So we had a client group, a network group, a server group, a database group, applications group. So we really embraced at that point because we were very mainframe centric, and these PCs were more of an annoyance. We all thought they would kind of go away eventually.
Yeah,
but from
didn't work out that way.
No, it didn't work out that way because people keep forgetting. It's like, yeah, but it's going to be twice as good 18 months from now, and another twice as good 18 months after that. So you start to see where things are going. You knew it was going to happen. The exact date was the only thing that was in question. So John promoted me to the director of the network group. So I had worldwide voice and data communications, PBX responsibility for the for the company, but mainly for the world headquarters downtown. And so one little story about the PBX, and again, it illustrates John's hands-off approach. So it was time to replace the PBX, and I'd inherited this closet full of telephones because this was back in the day where you had display phones and you had non-display phones, and of course people liked display phones because they knew who was calling them, and they could duck the call if they needed to. But as silly as it seemed, and I told my group, I said, we're going to have two phones in this building. That's it. They're both going to be beige. They're both going to have display phones. They're both going to have, one's going to be bigger, with more numbers for the admin assistants and the call centers, and everybody else gets the other. And my group, there's no way the executives will go for that. There's no way. Yeah, there are. And we did it. And it was that knowledge from John that said, if you give executives lots of choices, they'll go ahead and do like everybody else does and say, oh, I'd like to have one that matches my credenza. But if you it's a phone that, and he just sort of taught us, it's like, don't make anything a bigger problem out of, and it's kind of that ask for forgiveness versus permission rule. So we went ahead and everybody was fine. And my whole group was just astonished that would happen. I go, well, believe me, executives floor had a lot more to be worried about than the color of their phone. So then then after that, he was part of the decision to make me the director on the SAP, the technology side, and what I mentioned before, reporting to the two heads and getting that done. That was it was pretty high pressure. We like to say that none of us knew how to spell SAP on day one, but 9 months later, we had our first implementation done down in the coated board division that you mentioned. So that was the two big things that happened.
Yeah, and that's a good example too for me of something that John taught me. Well, I don't know, and again, I don't remember if it was something he consciously said out loud, but it certainly oozed into my pores, is that um, an early success on a project is a big deal. Do something early in the game that demonstrates value, demonstrates your commitment to someone else's success. And that case of going from 0 to 9 months and an implementation at the Martin Mill in Cottonton, Alabama, um, certainly proved the value of having a good partner in wanting to get stuff done. So, Jim McGrain had come from that division. It was a division that was very change ready. And, while we had, at least I remember my share of arguments with, being a corporate guy versus a division guy. I certainly remember a good number of awkward discussions with some of those folks, but we had the discussion and we came to a decision. And there weren't that many, at least that I remember, places where it was like, okay, we're at an impasse, time to call in the big dogs to break this tie. More often than not, we figured out how to get it done amongst ourselves, like you were saying earlier. And that made a big deal in the early success of that project, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That if I look at other technology groups and other companies, a lot of those folks don't have that muscle. They never even had to, internally, sell each other in terms of a path forward. We did that constantly. It's just the way. There was no go to somebody else to tie break it. It wasn't expected. And I think if we had gone to John or any of the other ones and asked them to, they would have gone, no, you don't understand. We're not going to do that. You figure it out. You're the expert.
Yeah. And if you can't figure it out, I'll find a couple other people that can figure it out, but I'm not going to do it for you.
Yeah. And even Jim McGrain, he would say, because we had lots of arguments on the SAP product, so much that was going on. And he goes, I'll make a decision, but I really suggest that you guys get your heads together and figure out the decision before I make it. Because I probably won't make the right one. So those are executive leaders that really can, whether it's John's case, it's more of a gentle push down, and maybe Jim's, it was more of a forceful push down. The pushing down was really important part. It was a really great way to have, frankly.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when this was. It would have been a couple of years ago. It was post-COVID, so it's not been that far back. Did you spend a lot of time working with any of the consultant groups that we brought in more from a business level? People like McKinsey or any of those folks. There was a guy named Ozzie Horton who actually, uniquely enough, lived at the time here in Charleston, where I'm at now. And he was one of these, even for those days, $400 an hour was an expensive consultant. And I remember he always called the Mead people the 2%ers. These are people that really think through their problems. Now, that was kind of a backhanded compliment, because what he was really saying is we're really good about thinking about stuff and we ain't so good about getting it done necessarily. We know what decision to make, but we don't always make it strategically. But I always counted myself lucky that aside from John, you had people like Ray Lane and Wally Nugent and Jerry Tater and people like that were the senior executives of the business side of things. And I ran into Jerry at church, oddly enough, in Dayton. Jennifer and I were back up, so it might have been before Jennifer's mom moved down here. So it may have been previous to 2020. But I'm always thankful for the culture that those folks allowed somebody like John to succeed. And it's like the Charlie Brown, good guys finished last sort of thing. And John was a good guy, and he never finished last. I mean, he had a handful of situations, I'm sure, where it didn't turn out the way he would have wanted it. But he was always a good soldier and got things done in that regard. So my point there is I was thankful for the atmosphere that Jerry had created that allowed somebody like John, who was not a screamer and a shouter and genuinely lived a lot of the stuff that we've all been told, do this, empower people, give them, all that, all the buzzwords that you get out there about, executive management. John actually lived most of them, but just in a very discreet and kind sort of way, and very effectively. And it's the one thing I wish I had probably taken more from him. I try to be that way, but I'm just not as patient as John was. I have this bone in me that just says, okay, that's the right answer. All right, screw it, move on. And I never quite got John's patience. So, and I know I always felt like when I worked around you, at least outwardly, you were way more patient than I was. And I've always envied that about you. So I don't know. How did you feel about that? Did you feel like you were being patient all those years, or were you equally frustrated?
No, well, and my wife will tell you, I might be one of the most patient people on the planet. Um, I don't mind standing in lines. I don't mind. I'm just, I've just never been in that kind of hurry emotionally. So that kind of comes natural to me. I didn't know, I don't know whether it's, or what part of my background led me to that, but I've always been a pretty patient person. And in meetings, I tend to be very quiet at first because I like to
Mm-hmm.
listen to what other people are saying and
Right.
digest it and just patiently wait my turn to actually have. I'll speak when I think I have something intelligent to say, not really want to much before. Um, so, yeah, I think like we had big groups. We had a lot of things that we had to do.
Yeah.
You really did have to. No, I wouldn't say I was patient with um, moving forward. So if we had a network upgrade or we had the PBX upgrade or whatever, no, let's go full bore on it and don't let little tiny decisions hold up things. Really push forward on the projects and getting things done. Um, but one other thing about John, I just don't want to forget. He and Ray Lane, and you explain Ray's role in this, but they were tasked to decide whether or not, or to recommend if Mead should go to an ERP system. Um, the corporate
And
folks
more
had bought,
specifically, a centralized,
yeah,
a common ERP system, not just should we use one or two or three. Should it be one, and if one, which one?
right, and after most of the 1990s, the divisions would say, no, we can't run an ERP system. We have unique requirements. We can't do it. And then towards the ending of that decade, Coded Board said, well, we'd like to put in Bond, which is an ERP system, consumer
Yep.
and office products, and we want SAP.
Yep.
What if we had 6 or 7 divisions? Then there were 6 or 7 different answers, but they
Yeah.
all wanted it. And so John was tasked with one with Ray to decide, should we do this? And then and it sort of turned out to be not only a yes answer, but the answer was SAP. It has to be, and they made that decision. So you got 2 high-level executives that I'm sure couldn't write a piece of code between them,
Nope.
uh,
And nor
making
would they
the
want to.
making the biggest software decision the company had ever made, and they made it right.
Yeah.
Companies like Bond, SAP was and still is one of the big ones standing. Oracle and SAP being 2 biggest ones. Bond and some of the others, they never got to that scale, and they were
Yeah.
not.
I remember in that stage there were, because I was with School and Office at the time, and we had we had definitely had a strong lean towards SAP because of being a consumer products company. But I remember PeopleSoft, I think the finance people wanted to do, if I remember right.
They bought it. They spent $1 million on it.
Did they? I don't remember that, but yeah, wow. And then, like you said, Bond Coded Board wanted to do, and I'm sure had picked up Oracle, and somebody else had probably, and most of the others just weren't to that point of actually picking a piece of software yet. But if they had been allowed to proceed, I'm certain they would have picked something other than anything somebody else picked already.
Yeah.
Because that would be one of their selection criteria. Okay, what is other people not picked yet? So
And it
so
made
anyway,
sense. Consumer and office products was in discrete manufacturing, and that was SAP's sweet spot. That was really where
yeah,
they came from. So we had a lot of work to make it to adapt it to a process
yeah.
organization like the paper mills.
Yeah.
And
Very true.
And we teamed with Monsanto, which basically gave us an ERP system because Monsanto was in chemicals, which is also process manufacturing. So we got a quick start. That's how we ended up, doing it in 9 months to the first
Yeah,
implementation.
exactly. Well, Paul, I'll cut the conversation off here. Just I very much appreciate you taking some time out of your day, and I know John's both of our favorite people in the whole world, and miss working with you, miss working with all those folks to the degree that I miss working. Let's put it that way.
Bingo. Yeah, when I retired, I wrote a little, or I put a outgoing voicemail, basically, announcing to anybody who happened to call and didn't know I retired that I had. And it was, basically said, I don't think I really miss the working part of it, but I'm certainly going to miss all the people. I just enjoyed, I could not, I don't think could live in today's world of doing remote like this, 8 hours or 10 hours a day. It just drive me nuts. I'm too much of an outgoing person, which for an IT person, we may be two of the more outgoing.
Yeah, we're two outliers, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us today on Our 20 Days. Be sure to subscribe or like our website at our20days.com to make sure you receive all updates for new episodes. And again, thanks for joining us at Our 20 Days.